Hello and welcome to FF News' The Virtual Arena. I'm your host, Doug Mackenzie, and on today's very exciting episode, we're actually going to be looking at how we should really build a fintech. We're going to be looking at how security is at the core of everyone's mission, or at least it should be. And joining me here today, I have two guests right at the heart of that topic. First up, we have Mark Phillips from Dionach. Mark, how are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thank you, Douglas. Yeah, nice to be here.
Absolutely amazing. Mark, could you tell our viewers a bit more about yourself, your role at Dionach and Dionach 2?
Sure. Well, my name is Mark Phillips. I'm an information security consultant. ISACA certified information security manager, PCI QSA, ISO 27001 lead auditor, and a CREST certified web application penetration tester. Quite the mouthful.
But I mean, it shows you're in the right place. So, Mark, thank you so much for joining. Yeah, and also, could you tell us a bit more about Dionach? Sorry, I cut you off there.
Yeah, so Dionach I've been with Dionach for nearly 8 years now. They are an independent information security consultancy headquartered in Oxford in the UK. We offer a variety of different information security consultancy services, ranging from assurance activities such as network, web application, mobile app pen testing, red and purple team engagements, social engineering, and cloud-based security assessments. So that's kind of assurance, right the way through to governance, risk, and compliance services. So you've got your PCI DSS compliance, Swift customer security program assessments, ISO 27001 auditing, and our new virtual CISO offering as well.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Mark. I'm really excited to hear that kind of security angle in today's conversation. And also, John, bringing us to the fintech side of the conversation as well, we have Alex Matthey from Adyen. Alex, how are you doing?
I'm very good. Thanks for having me.
Alex, it's an absolute pleasure. And could you tell our viewers a bit more about yourself, your role, and Adyen too?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Alex Matthey. I'm the CTO of Adyen. I do have a technical background. I started my career as a software engineer and then over time focused more on the leadership side of things. I'm with Adyen for roughly 8 years, and Adyen is a global financial technology company. Initially, it started on the payment side, so payment processor. Over time obtaining acquiring licenses, also jumping into the acquiring space, and a few years back we received a European banking license and a US branch license, so now we are a fully regulated bank, and with that we are also by now offering more services than just payments.
Wow.
More towards embedded financial services.
That's absolutely incredible. I mean, that is the true journey of a fintech, isn't it? Starting out financial tech, then becoming almost this bank, and then an actual bank, and really starting to offer embedded financial services. I find that so fascinating. So, Alex, thank you so much for joining us too. Now, Alex, I'm going to stick with you for the first question because I'd like to see, as you've mentioned, Adyen itself has gone through this journey of various different financial services offerings, and I'd like to see your perspective, when it comes to the key mistakes when creating a fintech or creating the next step of your fintech. When it comes to the security side of things, what are the key mistakes that you forget?
The way how I look at it is that, we are living in a relatively fast moving world. And if you look at what we've gone through with Adyen, we have constantly changed a lot of things.
Yeah.
I think that's very positive. That's something we are very proud of. And if security becomes an afterthought, you could argue that makes you quick in moving things, but I actually believe it's the other way around. If you do a lot of great things in the beginning, and then at some point you have to stop because the security team steps in and says like, wait a minute, now we need to redo things. I think that's really a strong mistake, and therefore to handle that, I think it's very important to really put security indeed at the foundation, not make it the responsibility of a certain team at a certain moment in the process, but actually, really build it into your foundation as a company. I think that's something that a lot of people do wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. So, and also it must be quite frustrating for all these hot-headed, creators, and then suddenly it's like, actually, we forgot the most important thing and got to redo it several months or even years down the line. And also, Mark, I've got to get your perspective as well from the security side of things as well. Do you agree with Alex there? Is that a key mistake you see fintechs often stumbling on?
Absolutely. I mean, just to kind of echo what Alex was saying. I mean, the key thing really is to empower the employees to use security as a tool rather than see it as a hindrance. So yeah, you don't want to be halfway through implementing a project and then find out that, oh, this piece of tech that we want to use has horrific security vulnerabilities, so we've just got to stop it, can everything, and go back to the beginning again. It's got to come from the top down a lot of the time too. So, having a clear vision and strategy that leads to defined information security objectives as an organization is really key. And that then filters down, through the branches to the people on the ground who are actually kind of creating the software and implementing the projects.
Well, that's actually leads perfectly onto my next question, Mark, because I was actually interested. I know I'm talking to two tech guys, but you've kind of alluded to what I was going to ask. And is it as black and white? Is what's more important? Looking at the kind of the culture in a company, or looking at the mission or the tech, or is it just following the regulation to the letter and not future-proofing yourself, Mark? What's more important when taking these next steps?
Well, as with most like approaches, I think you can benefit by being malleable a little bit and adopting ideas from a few different approaches. But I would suggest that security comes from the top down. So having that clear mission should translate into a good culture of security and uptake from employees, which in turn should then, consider things like compliance and legislation, and other security requirements potentially that you're interacting with your clients with, to then dictate which tech is best suited for the organization.
Interesting. So the tech doesn't, can be suited to different organizations. It's not just a one size fit all.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, there may be some bits of tech that you just have to use because it's so good, but often you're trying to find the thing that works for the organization the best. It might not be, it might not be the best overall piece of kit, but what's going to enable us to deliver our solution in a secure manner.
Okay, interesting. So Alex, we've heard from Mark there that it has to be top down, it has to be throughout the whole organization. How do you create this positive security culture that Mark was talking about?
Actually, I think it starts by finding the right people. I think you need to find people that are, especially in the fintech world, that are actually interested in security as well. You need to already during hiring, or at least we do that, we really check if people are interested in thinking about that as well from the very beginning. So therefore, I tend to agree with it needs to be top down in terms of vision or mission of saying, hey, we want to be a security first company. We do believe this is important for us. And but on the other hand, I think a lot of the decisions, a lot of the real work actually happens from the bottom up, because the decisions on which technology, which way, what is the right direction for a certain project, these are typically being made somewhere within the organization, and everybody should think about it. So I think it's actually both ways that need to work nicely together. And then if you indeed have the right people, if you from the very start try to find people that are interested, that also want to take that into account when taking decisions, then I think that creates that positive vibe about it. If you then can really talk about it, and it's not let's not talk about security, that either makes it very slow, or it's you cannot touch it, it sits somewhere else. I think that's the big mistake there.
Having the concept of it's someone else's perspective, someone else's job, sorry. Now, with that in mind then, Mark, I think that's a good point, but with those types of organizations that have security from the top and the bottom, the kind of, I like to think of them as for instance, the digitally native organizations, the fintechs that have started in this, with no legacy systems and have built security in from the bottom and the top, as we've been talking about. How do they keep their security going? Is it like a one-stop shop? If you're digitally native, you're then absolutely fine going forward, or is it a constant evolution, Mark?
I'd have to, choosing out of those two, it's definitely a constant evolution. Like as Alex alluded to at the beginning, you're always creating new services and moving on, and it's quite a fast-paced world, and technology does move on very quickly. So it's a good mixture of having or looking at compliance and legislation, performing assurance activities, and actually making sure that you deal with the outcomes of those assurance responsibilities. Far too many times we would go into an organization, perform a penetration test, give them the results, give them a recommendation, an action plan, and then you come back to next year and they have the same vulnerabilities, or almost all the same vulnerabilities.
Wow, that must be frustrating.
It can be, but we're trying to assist people here. That's the main thing.
Nice.
But I just wanted to go back to Alex's point about
Please.
resourcing and having the right people, because there's a real big skills shortage when it comes to security. We're finding in the industry that there's not enough people. There's not enough people who want to come in and do penetration testing or can kind of deliver the services at the right quality at the GRC level, for example. Sure. So I'm interested to find out how you're dealing with that, Alex.
Yeah, I'm actually, for me, it's less about the very specific security skills. For that, I agree. There is a big shortage. For me, it's more about the mindset of that's being part of your job. Because from our perspective, security really plays a role in every single role within Adyen, from an account manager that is handling merchant data, to an engineer working on our product, to network infrastructure people that are actually building something. Obviously, very different skills are needed, but the understanding that it's part of the job, that they are the very first line of defense when dealing with whatever they do in their job, and that security needs to be part of the assessment of what they're doing. That is something that you can check very easily, and then you need to have some experts. You need to talk with partners. You need to get external information in. We worked with you in the past as well to help us. So you obviously want to have experts to also control you. And I think that's all good, but I think the base, the foundation is actually being built within the organization and with people that are actually do that. And I think a very important part of that, because Doug, you also asked that how do we build that positive culture around that? I think very important is that you avoid a blaming culture around that, right? So that's you need to, as you just said, right? If there is a finding, it should actually be positive, because you found it, and then it can be fixed. And you need to find an architecture from a technical perspective, obviously, that adds a lot of layers in terms of security, so that one specific vulnerability in the best case does not have a huge impact. But you need to build a culture where actually, you allow teams and the individuals to make mistakes, have that safe environment that you can talk about it and that you fix it and that you learn from each other. I think that's a very, very important part.
Empathy and security is what I'm hearing. I quite like this. It's here. You always think that, and imagine a lot of employees, especially when they're in the payments scene and the finance scene in general. If they've realized that there's been a security breach, it's suddenly a very scary feeling. Everyone thinks that they might be there must be serious consequences. But actually, if you look at it in the other way, it's actually a positive, then people can grow and your culture can become far more positive. That's quite an exciting perspective. Now, guys,
because if you just one example of that, because if you think about, hey, somebody clicks on an email, on a phishing email, right? What do? You at some point realize it. Well, do you say like, I better take it by myself and hope nothing happens, or will you be very active and say like, I reach out to our internal security team and say like, I might did something wrong, but it's for sure that this is the better approach. But for that, you need to have that culture that allows people to do so and act correctly.
It's a much more difficult control to have. With technical, if you're being bombarded by attacks over the internet on your external facing servers, you get to see that because you'll have kind of IPS or IDS in front of it, or some kind of logging, whereas you don't always get to have the same controls with people. So having the culture is a really key aspect. And
there's multiple phishing attempts every day, social engineering for everyone. So it's definitely a big target.
Wow, I mean, it's incredible to hear that we're seeing the nefarious actors, and I guess it's a testament to both of your guys' skills and the fact that the tech is now the strongest part of the chain. it's now the human side is now the weakest part of the chain, and we're seeing that on the consumer side and on the employee side, which is really quite fascinating. So I mean, I know we've been talking about this evolution throughout this conversation, but Mark, when we look at the traditional institutions, the traditional banks that have been around for hundreds of years, they have tens of thousands of employees. How can these institutions fight back against this never-ending tide of bad actors?
A lot of it is what we've already discussed, to be honest with you, having the right culture and trying to implement the right controls. If you're thinking about it from a technical perspective, these old institutions have all this kit, some maybe still have mainframes, let's say, that they find it very difficult to migrate away from. And there's lots of good guidance from organizations that are trying to help in this field. You've got NIST in America, the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre, for example. They do provide a lot of good guidance and information for these organizations to mitigate as much as possible the security risks that might be as part of those systems.
Yeah. Now, with that in mind then, guys, we've talked about payments and obviously how finance is such a big target, especially for these large institutions. We're now starting to see ISO standards change. And Mark, you mentioned in your intro that you'd worked on a few of the international standards previously. So when it comes to the changing ISO standards in payments and the changing information security scene behind a payment, how is that going to change the security scene? Now that banks are getting far more information from a payment, what does that mean for bad actors and also preventing security too?
Well, it means that there's a lot more data for them, for the bad actors to get hold of, and they can do a lot more damage with it, I suppose. When it comes to the actual ISO standards changing, I mean, not a lot, to be honest, has changed between the 2013 and 2022 versions of the standards.
Yeah.
Less controls. They've kind of tightened up the different areas, so you've now got organizational, people, physical and technological controls in the new standard, whereas before it was slightly wider ranging kind of categories.
Yeah.
And you've got other standards like the SWIFT Customer Security Program. That seems to be ever evolving. They're always introducing new controls into that standard too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. So, Alex, now that CSOs, CTOs, CIOs are increasingly having a bigger seat at the table in this ever-changing ecosystem, especially when it comes to data usage, what can you guys bring to the board that maybe has been previously not listened to enough? What is the benefit of having you guys at the board table a bit more?
Yeah, I'm obviously not experienced with other companies, so therefore I can only reply for that for my own experience, and I have mostly worked in technology first companies, and that's sure. Also, even though we are a bank by now, this is not how we interpret ourselves, how we believe we still are a tech first company. And therefore I think at Adyen at least it was always important. But if you look at kind of our architecture, it was from the very first day onwards, it was actually built in a way where security is a very fundamental part, and that was because the people that founded the company, that people that were sitting on the board table, they understood how important it is and how important it is to find a way to scale that into a bigger organization as well. So I think it is really really crucial. When it comes to other organizations that might need to transform, I think that's a much more difficult exercise, and therefore I can imagine having a real spokesman in all the relevant decisions that are being made. I think that makes a lot of sense, and that will help on that way. And yeah, from that one, because you were talking about legacy systems, I think we can learn from these guys also a lot. I mean, they have built long-term successful companies as well. So they are doing some things right.
Yeah.
And obviously they are changing now as well. They become more digital and they listen to these people more. But I think the way how they implement it is maybe indeed something that we can also look at ourselves, because at some point we will become legacy and then we will have to change. So I think there are probably some good examples in it as well.
I love hearing that, Alex, because so often we have fintechs on the show, thinking that they own everything, they own every good idea, and actually to have this perspective that, look, guys, we constantly change, we constantly sometimes have to actually look at the traditional institutions. There's a reason they've been around for hundreds of years. It's because they always do it right in the end. So that's a really fascinating perspective. And also, Mark, you mentioned as well when we were first starting the conversation how it is really a top-down change, to create a holistic change. So, do you think we're going to start seeing, if the traditional institutions listen to the CTOs, the CIOs, the CSOs more, that this change will become holistic?
It certainly should be, but I think one of the issues that those organizations have or might have is that they don't have the right person on the board or the right person in that position to inform the rest of the board. What we found, especially in public sector organizations, is that there's a lack of fundamental understanding of what security should look like and how it should be implemented, and therefore the wrong message is being broadcast to the rest of the board. So one of the ways that we try and combat that is with the virtual CISO position. So you get expertise of our consultants who have seen various different organizations, the way that they work in different cultures, and they get that experience and they can condense and provide the right message to the board.
Amazing. This constant look at education and culture change and evolution seems to be a really running theme through this. It's not, one size fits all, and it's also not one and done. So with that in mind, then I want to look as we see a lot of institutions now moving from doing everything in-house, on-prem, starting to use cloud-based platforms. Alex, with the introduction of these cloud-based platforms, what are the security risks behind those?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. And actually, Adyen is a company that is not using public clouds at all currently. And one of the reasons is that you actually introduce a new set of risks that you have to cover. And compared to the previous setup, the setup that we are on, where indeed, you are on premise, you have much less control.
Yeah.
And that is something that people will have to handle. You need to find specific people that know about the specific risks that are being introduced. From our perspective, they are also very specific per provider, for example. So actually to build something that is then cloud agnostic even makes it more difficult. So when it comes to monitoring, observability, all of these things, configuration of the services, you really need to find different people, and finding them experienced enough to really secure it is very, very difficult. From my perspective, that's the biggest, from a security perspective, the biggest angle with cloud in general, and then public cloud very specifically. It's an introduction of new risks, and I'm not sure if people jump on it very often because it's very fast. It looks
There's an
like
element of glamour there.
Yeah, it's also cost efficient in the beginning, at least, and not on the long term, from my perspective. And they underestimate how much time you have to spend to actually make that setup also secure.
Absolutely. It's interesting, isn't it? Because there seems to be there was a big uptake in kind of cloud services a few years ago, and we're starting to see a slight pullback where some people have realized exactly the same position that you're in, Alex. Like whenever I first heard the term cloud, you just got to replace it with someone else's server, and that gives you a better way of kind of analyzing the risk that's involved with your data being on someone else's server, not just on this mythical thing. But yeah, I'm really interested on where your servers are located, Alex. Did you have your own kind of server rooms, or are you hosting in a data center somewhere?
Yeah, so we have co-located spaces in data centers all around the world. But then we own the hardware and we also do the maintenance ourselves, set up everything.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, interesting. So not quite someone else's server, just someone else's room. But data centers do have very good physical security controls, generally speaking.
Yeah,
exactly. I think you also have to understand what you're good at and what not so much. And I think building own data centers, that's maybe not our expertise.
Yeah, it's like owning what you're good at. And I think that's a theme we see running through fintech as a whole, is everyone can provide the service that they excel at to create the best financial services for their customers. And as someone that speaks with financial institutions every day, and Mark, kind of hearing about this mythical cloud, for instance, that you mentioned, and it's just this kind of like one-stop shop to actually all our problems, but actually there is a pullback, and that's really fascinating, and it's the first time we've heard it on the show. So guys, thank you so much for bringing it to our perspective here. And we're now going to kind of end on a future-based question. And Alex, you mentioned that you've been working on the embedded finance side of things as well, so I'm actually going to get you to start this question too. And that's, as finance becomes more embedded, open, and we see non-financial players getting into finance, looking after people's PCI data, what is the future for information security, and what lessons do you think you've learned in your guys' transformation will lend itself to the current ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that is really a good question, and it is in something that we are seeing quite a lot. We used to work mostly with clients for whom we were performing payments, and what we're seeing right now is that indeed there is kind of a layer established in between software as a service companies that actually do offer a certain set of services to their customers, very specialized for restaurants, for bars, for e-commerce or something like that, and they step into the financial tech as well. Very often they don't do it themselves, but indeed they handle the data. That's also the way how we attack it. So we don't go for the end customer directly, but we actually provide white label services to them, so that they can introduce it. And we believe that's actually a very secure way of doing it in the future as well, because we take care of kind of the regulatory side with all our licenses and everything, and are actually able to put them in a position where they can twist the services in a relatively secure way to the real needs of their customers. So we actually believe that this will help to sharpen kind of the edges of embedded financial services to real use cases, from that fancy word to something that really makes an impact. But that in a secure way, because I'm a little bit afraid on too many people having too much access to data. I think regulators all around the world, you see they're tightening the screws more and more, which I think is a very positive thing. This I think is something that the ecosystem will move more towards, kind of finding very specific providers for these services that are actually fully regulated, very secure, and can deliver the set of services that are needed to actually turn it into something useful for the end customers.
I love hearing use cases, and I love hearing the drive towards them, because all too often we hear about open finance, embedded finance, and it doesn't actually lead anywhere. But actually we're starting to hear them, the use cases come out. So thank you, Alex. And also Mark as well, from your perspective at Dionach, as well as for instance, I imagine you work with financial services companies. As you see non-financial services companies getting into looking after payment data, having to protect themselves, what are the biggest security risks there, and what's your perspective about this new ecosystem too?
I'm not quite sure how to articulate everything.
It's quite a difficult question
in a concise manner.
I mean, I guess we could tighten the question into, with this future ecosystem, as we're seeing bad actors target the humans more, and also non-financial services companies getting involved in payment data. What's your advice to those companies that are starting to look to get into handling payments when it comes to security? What do they need to be aware of when building their non-fintech fintech?
Well, it kind of goes back in full circle to our earlier discussion that you've got to have the right people involved, or at least the right people to at least consider the security implications, and then reach out to the right people such as us to come in and help them build the right platforms.
Sure.
When it comes to like the security controls and things that they should be implementing, I'd honestly say that identification is probably one of the biggest things in the security ecosystem, because as we mentioned earlier, the attack surface is mainly people nowadays, and generally speaking, in my experience, it's going to happen at some stage. So being able to identify these breaches at an early stage is the best way to go about things, and you can do this via a variety of different means. You can outsource a lot of analysis to SOCs. You can include your own automation, but the key thing is that you've got a good, solid process to identify and remediate very, very quickly. You want to be able to wade through the massive logs and information that you can see to make sure that they're being dealt with promptly.
Incredible. And I've got to then follow up then, and I'm sorry for ending on a follow-up question, but do you think digital identity will become commonplace soon, and as you mentioned, will it be the kind of golden goose?
Honestly, I don't know.
And you know what I find from hosting security themed virtual arenas is that's the perspective to take, because the nefarious actors are always evolving, as is the technology, and you can't own every bad idea or nefarious actors idea. You've got to constantly evolve, and I think that has been a running theme, as well as the talent, as well as the culture throughout this whole conversation. Guys, thank you so much for your time. It's been really fascinating hearing your insights. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves too.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, very much so. It was really good.
Thank you, Mark. And guys, also as well, a big thank you to our viewers too. You can catch the rest of the series and much more over at ffnews.com, and of course YouTube, but especially LinkedIn, where I'm sure you'll see Alex, Mark and I in the comments. Guys, thank you very much and goodbye.